Marketers often hear wisdom from psychology, sociology, and similar disciplines. But how do we improve our marketing beyond one theory at a time? What can marketing leaders do to embrace behavioral science holistically instead of simply translating one psychological principle into a single campaign? Today's expert is here to help. Marketing and sales are full of myths, misconceptions, and sometimes even flat-out lies. Join us as we get out of the echo chamber and dive into behavioral science.
Hello and welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast, where we cut through the hype and confusion of conventional marketing advice. I'm Paul Frodge, joined by Mr. Marketing, and for today's conversation, the big baccalaureate of behavioral science, Colin Jeffries. Colin, how are you doing today?
Oh, Paul, I'm doing well. I love these alliterations. You get more creative with them every time.
Absolutely.
I'm excited that we'll dive in and talk about behavioral science today.
Colin, I know you're a bright guy, but I didn't realize you had a bachelor's degree in behavioral science.
I have a bachelor's in marketing. I feel like that's pretty close, right? I had to read some case studies and, I know what a p-value is, Paul, for whatever that's worth.
There you go.
Well, let's invite today's guest into the conversation. We are joined today by Nancy Harhut, the author of the book Using Behavioral Science in Marketing and Chief Creative Officer at HBT Marketing, where she specializes in applying human behavior techniques to marketing. She and her team have won more than 175 awards for marketing effectiveness. She has delivered keynotes internationally, has been recognized as a top 40 digital strategist by the Online Marketing Institute, and an Ad Club top 100 creative influencer. She believes that to be successful, you must have a good hypothesis and then test like crazy. Welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast, Nancy Harhut.
Thank you so much. Very good to be here, Colin and Paul. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, Nancy, we're thrilled to dive into the conversation, and I'm sure we'll get to a lot of really good conversation points and everything related to your book and your work, but I'm just curious. I know you read a lot of behavioral science and economics. I'm curious, what are you reading right now that's intriguing?
Oh, wow. So I'm a little backlogged, to be honest with you, but I'm partway through Rory Sutherland's Alchemy. I know I should be finished with it I should have finished it a long time ago, but I'm partway through that, partway through Melina Palmer's The Truth About Pricing. So juggling a few different things.
Well, I'll just say I respect the fact that you continue to improve your mastery of our craft, if I can be so bold as to include Paul and I in the conversation here. But just the fact that you are a published author, you are an international keynote speaker, and you continue to read and research, I think is very respectable.
Well, I think all of us do, though, don't we? Right? We probably consider ourselves students of the craft, and we're constantly looking for, new developments, new research, new ways to apply things. So I don't think I'm unusual in that respect, but I absolutely do embrace it. And anything I can get my hands on, I'm always happy to kind of head down the rabbit hole.
Nancy, you sound a lot like me with books and, doing a podcast. A lot of the guests that we have books and are publishers and authors and everything of that nature. So oftentimes I get my backlog of books as well, where it's like you start a chapter and it's so intriguing, but you got another podcast coming up or, I'm a student of the game as well. And it's always one of those things where I'll take some nuggets. Colin and I talk about that all the time, some nuggets from different books that we bring out in our podcast as well. So it's always interesting, all the new books that are coming out. And it's, Colin, you actually just had a book published as well that you were an author of, one of the chapters. So definitely interested in diving into that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's on pre-order. Well, by the time this drops, it will probably be out, but it comes out Friday, September 20th. So didn't mean to steal the show here and plug my book, but Nancy, you have
what's the name of it? What's the name of the book?
It's called Collecting Jelly Beans. It's a multi-author marketing, sales, and growth book. So all about how we can use different perspectives and different ideas to help grow our organizations and our revenue.
Sounds awesome. Wow. All right.
Well, I'll have to send you a copy. You send a copy of Using Behavioral Science and Marketing, so I'll send a copy to you. That'd be great.
That'd be awesome. Sure.
But Nancy, I'd love to dive in to what I think you've termed the magnetic middle, where a lot of us, we see our brand or we see our product or service as being on the bleeding edge, but most people don't actually want to be on the bleeding edge. How do we as marketers understand the magnetic middle? How do we leverage the magnetic middle?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because you're absolutely right. Like, we like to think of ourselves as, as out there on the bleeding edge, advanced, cutting edge. But the truth of the matter is, behavioral scientists have done some research, and what they found is very often, we're not as comfortable being on that knife edge, nor are we comfortable feeling like we're lagging behind. Where we feel the most comfortable is in the middle, right? We have a tendency to gravitate towards the middle. It feels safe, right? There are a lot of people there. We think that, okay, it's probably not a bad place to be. And so I actually used it for one of my clients. I had a client, buckle up, guys, this is going to be really exciting. I had a client that was selling insurance to dentists. Yes, exciting.
Fascinating.
Right? But the way it works is, if you're selling life insurance, it's a hard thing to do, right? It's a hard thing to get people to buy it to begin with. Everyone wants to kick the can down the road, right? They think they have plenty of time, and no one wants to think they're going to die, right? So it's like, I'll deal with it later. And if you've been successful at getting someone to buy life insurance, they have now crossed off the list. They have no desire to revisit it. They've checked it off their list. They're done. But the truth of the matter is, you should revisit it every couple of years, because maybe your family has changed. Maybe your business has changed. Maybe your needs have changed. Maybe you need more, maybe you need less, but you really should look at it, because you bought it for a reason, and you would hate to find out that you didn't, have the right amount because things changed. But try telling that to someone who's already crossed it off the list, right? They're deaf ears. It's like, oh, insurance, nope, already did that, don't need to engage. And so we took on this assignment for this client. We said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to use the pull of the magnetic middle. We're sending out this letter. It was a sell off the page letter, and we're going to include a chart in the letter, kind of a graph. And at one end was $0 of insurance that, it's the least anyone could have, right? And at the other end was $3 million. That was the most this particular company sold. And again, they were targeting dentists. And then they showed a little mark that said, "You are here." And we asked them to use the great majority of their customers, but to cut out anyone who was under that 1.5 million mark. So most of their customers had less than 1.5 in insurance, which would be halfway, right? So you get this thing, you open up the letter, you glance at it, and one of the first things you see is this little thing that says, "You are here," and you are left of center, right? And we didn't expect that would make people immediately, say, "Oh, I need to have $3 million." But what we did think would happen is it would nudge people closer to the center. And that's exactly what happened. They had a 459% increase in sales over the previous control, which was the thing that had done the best up until then. And this is sell off the page. This isn't, "Oh, give me some more information," or "Let's talk about it." It's literally, here's my check, here's my credit card number, give me some more coverage. So I thought it was a really good example of taking something that, had been researched academically and applying it practically to a real world example. It's like, all right, these people should be buying more insurance. How do we get them to do that? How do we get them to really consider this? And that worked.
That's a fascinating real world example, Nancy. And I appreciate the fact that you explained it in a story. Paul gave me a hard time earlier about having a bachelor's degree in marketing. But when I think about the types of distributions, obviously there's the bell curve distribution, there's the power law distribution. If I'm a marketer and I look at my business and think it's more power law versus bell curve, how do I apply that magnetic middle concept?
So, I think there's a couple of ways. One thing that we didn't get to do with this particular client, but I wanted to, is, I said we had 0 to 3 million. And so we took anyone that was, left of center, right? But what about people who had more? Well, we could have made that left axis where they were and had it all the way go out to 3 million, So maybe I had, maybe we started at 1.5 million. Say, here's 1.5 million to 3 million, and you're at 1.5 million. And you're like, oh, maybe I should have a little bit more. So I think there are ways to make it work, just depending on how you're setting up your left and right points, to determine what the middle would be.
That's a really fascinating concept of how do we reframe from being on the bleeding edge to really leveraging that magnetic middle. So very, very, very cool.
Yeah, I think, it's making you feel like, if you had 1.5 million, you'd think, with 0 to 3, you think you're really good. But if it's 1 million to 3, or if it's 1.5 million to 3, or even it's 1 million to 3, suddenly your 1.5 million doesn't look as good. You want to scoot closer to the center, closer to that middle. So it is interesting. I know fundraisers use it a lot too, where they'll put the donation that they're really hoping you'll make in the center, because people just have a tendency to gravitate towards the center. There's almost a related concept called the door in your face technique. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not. I was going to tie it into the autonomy bias principle that you talk about in your book, but let's go to the door in your face technique and we can swing back to the autonomy principle.
Sure. Yeah. So door in your face is really interesting. What researchers have found is if you ask for something that you don't expect people to say yes to, and then quickly, once they say no, which you expect them to do, then you quickly pivot to the ask that you really wanted to make, you're much more likely to get them to say yes. So researchers ran this experiment where they went out and they asked people, hey, how would you, would you be interested in accompanying a group of juvenile delinquents to the zoo on a Saturday afternoon? People were like, no, I don't know these kids. I have better things to do with my Saturday afternoons. I don't want to take a group of juvenile delinquents to the zoo. No, And then researchers went out and they asked another group of people, hey, would you be willing to contribute to donate 2 hours a week for the next 2 years of your time counseling juvenile delinquents? And again, people are like, I'm not. I don't want to do that. I don't know these kids. 2 hours a week for 2 years. No, And then the researchers went out a third time, and this time they stacked the two requests. So they went out and they were like, so Colin, would you be willing to, go out and spend 2 hours a week for the next 2 years counseling juvenile delinquents? And when you say no, then they'd say, well, all right, how about this? Would you just take them to the zoo for an afternoon? 50% of them said yes to the zoo. Now, when they'd been asked alone, I don't want to go to the zoo with these people, these juvenile delinquents. But when the two were stacked, so the idea is it's the door in your face. You ask that question where the door is going to start slamming in your face, and then you kind of quickly pivot and ask make a lesser request. But because humans have been socialized to just be cooperative, to get along, to kind of, give and receive, because our ancient ancestors would, if they were kicked out of the tribe, they wouldn't survive. We needed to depend on each other. And so, I asked this one thing, you say no. So I concede. I drop back and I ask something that's not as much of a commitment. And because I conceded, you feel like, well, maybe I can as well. It's really very interesting. So I think there could be something tied to that as well. In addition to autonomy bias.
That makes a ton of sense, and it does really play into autonomy bias as well, Nancy, because we're saying, do you want X or do you want Y? Right? One is bigger, one is a lower commitment, and we're giving somebody the impression that they actually have some sort of ability to decide between one or the other, versus your option is buy life insurance. Well, now we're giving you this whole spectrum of options. You could have a million, 1.5, 1.75, 2, 2.5, 3, right? We're giving them this whole spectrum where now they're not deciding, do I want life insurance, but it's how much. And that, again, the ability to be autonomous and to make those decisions is just really cool.
Yeah. The whole idea of autonomy bias, just to keep your listeners, up to speed, is the idea that that we as people have this deep-seated desire to exercise some kind of control over ourselves and our environments. We want agency. We don't like to be pushed into things, forced into things. We like to have choices. And if you can give somebody a choice, as you said, the question goes from do I or do I not want this to, oh, well, which of these two do I want? And there is a third option there, which is I want neither of them. But we rarely think that way. When there's, one thing, it's do I or do I not. When there's two, it isn't do I or do I not, it's which of these two. There was some research that came out of Tulane University that found you can nearly quadruple the likelihood that people will make a buying decision in the moment when you give them those choices. Now, of course, that said, we don't want people to run around and say, well, let's give them 10 or 20 choices, right? Won't that be great? Because then analysis paralysis or choice overload, whatever you want to call it, sets in, and people are loving all their choices, but they can't make a decision. So 2 is better than 1. 3 is good because there's that, that magic number of 3. I would cut it off at like 4 or 5, wouldn't go beyond that. But choice can be so powerful.
You make a good point, Nancy, in terms of looking at something that we talk about all the time at our agency, and looking at consulting. And when you only have one choice, we talk about that a lot, and it's either a yes or a no. And then it's harder to get the conversation to continue. And looking at almost like the software as a service model, where it's a good, better, best model. And the majority of that, you want people to fall in the middle, and more success happens that way.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got, you feel like you're not being pushed into something. You're the one who's actively choosing, and, kind of all things being equal, you go with the middle one. Maybe you think the one on the left is, I don't know, too cheap. It's not going to be as good. And the one on the right is going to be too expensive and it's going to have stuff I don't need. But the one in the middle just feels right. And that's where people have a tendency to go. It's a very common decision-making shortcut. And I think you're right when we're putting proposals in front of prospects, when we're putting service levels in front of prospects, when we're putting products in front of prospects, having that range is, incredibly helpful.
That totally makes sense. And one thing we did during a happy hour last week with our team, one of our team members led it, but it was the Enneagram test, and it was interesting to see out of 15 of us, there was a couple that wouldn't make a decision, and they were very vocal about it at the end. They just went straight down the middle, and that kind of parlays into some of the conversation here with behavioral science, in my opinion.
Yeah, sometimes it's called the Goldilocks effect, but it's like that. Yeah, just grab the middle. And there are real world ramifications for that. I'm thinking about finance. A lot of clients that we have are in the financial services industry, and you're I don't know, you sign up for your 401k, right? And it's like, okay, you can choose from all these accounts. And what do? We're like, a third, a third, a third, or 20%, 20%, 20%, 20, like we don't know. So we just kind of divide it up equally, or, a quarter, a quarter, a quarter, a quarter. And the truth of the matter is that's probably not the best thing to do, but so many people do it because we don't know what we're doing, so we just kind of, like you said, we play it down the middle, or we equally divide things because we're looking for these decision-making shortcuts. We don't really have the time or the energy, or in some cases even the expertise to really get at the crux of the matter and research the answers. And so we're like, all right, I need to make a shorthand decision. This is what I'm going to do. As marketers, if we know that people have a tendency to make these shorthand decisions, we might as well use it to our advantage, right? We might as well serve up our marketing messages to capitalize on that, and and to help them make the right decision. If we know people are going to take the path of least resistance, let's have that path lead to a good decision that works for them as well as us. Make it easy for them to do what we want them to do, make it a little bit harder for them to do what they probably shouldn't do.
Nancy, you make some really good points, and I'm thinking through the right way to express this because marketers often, I'll say in quotations, know best, right? I want this person to hit a landing page, and the call to action is subscribe, is give me your email address, is buy now, is call, is whatever, right? Get a free quote. Here's what I want them to do. Recognizing if I make that as easy as possible, but I also give them the ability to be autonomous and decide what they're actually going to do and those sorts of things. There's so much balance that comes into, I don't want to give them too many options, to your point. So there's analysis by paralysis. I don't want to give them so many options that they choose wrong, but I also don't want to give them no options where they're deciding, do I fill out the form fill or do I exit the page? How do we take that knowledge and really apply it in a marketing sense where we're ceding some control, but we're still able to accomplish our key performance indicators?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually, because, on the one hand, I'm saying you got to give people choices. And on the other hand, as a marketer or a brand, we're like, yeah, but the dirty little secret is there is a particular choice I want people to make, right?
Right.
There are a few things that we can do. You could put three choices in front of someone, but you can use a little bit of social proof and say, well, this is our most popular option, or this is our fastest growing, or this is the best value, or even say, this is a top choice, or the best choice. So you've got the three, but we're giving you a little bit of a nudge in one direction because, this would be the better one. Or we have the three things, displayed, but the one that we want them to take is just a little bit larger. Or it's shown in a little bit larger, or it's got a different color behind it, or there's something that emphasizes it. So by color or by position, or by a little snipe on it, we're tipping people in one direction or another. There's also, if you ever use those yes/no buttons, there was some research that came out of the new neuromarketing blog, which is published in the Netherlands. But what they found is a properly framed yes/no button can get you anywhere between a 40 and a 125% increase in your conversion. So what do I mean by properly framed? Well, you could have one button that says, yes, get the free case study now. And the other button would say, no, I don't need to know how my marketing is performing. So you're like, all right, well, given those two choices, I better get the case study, right? So the copy on the no button kind of points out the consequences of not saying yes. You still have a choice. You can choose the yes or the no, but it's again nudging you or prompting you in the direction that the marketer wants you to go in. So those are a couple of ways to still preserve the idea of autonomy, but to maybe increase the likelihood that people make the right choice.
Interesting point there. When you were talking about the choices and the different responses that marketers and businesses and want people to make, I liken it to when I'm in a restaurant and it's there's asterisks next to certain menu items, and I always wonder if that is intentional. Is that really the best steak? Or is that the best profit margin for the business?
So yeah, that is a good question, and it reminds me. I was out for dinner um, this summer actually, and it's got to be an occupational hazard with people like us, right? But I'm out for dinner. I'm looking at the menu, and there are a couple of entrees that have that star, that asterisk. But I can't. I'm looking at the bottom. I'm looking on the back, and there's nothing. There's no key to it, right? There's nothing running along the bottom. There's nothing on the back. So I asked the waitress, the server. I'm like, so I just, I'm just curious, why, and I don't know, and I'm like, oh, don't worry about it. I was just kind of curious. Don't worry about it. The end of the meal, she comes back and she says, the owner happened to be in the back. And so I asked the owner, and apparently those used to be like our most popular dishes. But when they reprinted the menu, they left that little line off, and it was literally a printing error, but nobody had noticed it until I was like asking, like, what is that about? So, so going back to your question, I think it really comes down to how honest and ethical the marketer is, right? So you could say, all right, these items aren't selling. So let's say that they're our most popular and maybe that will make them popular, but that's not honest, right? Or you could say, you know what, I know that people, based on social proof, like to do what other people do. They feel more confident. So I'm going to tell them what, our most popular items are because that'll guide them in that direction. And I think very often, the things that are popular sellers are actually profitable for a company. There was one experiment that I remember reading about where it was a menu at a Chinese restaurant, and when they flagged something as most popular or more popular, it actually increased its popularity because, it's like, all right, it's popular. I'm absolutely going to go for it. And it just made it, it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, can we use it unethically? I imagine we could. Should we? Absolutely not. Marketers should treat their customers and prospects the way they would, treat their own families, right? Like, don't say something that isn't true. You might win in the short term, but in the long term, there's blowback. You'll erode trust, and you may never be able to get it back.
Well, and just to build on that too, there are so many ways marketers can honestly, with integrity, frame certain things to still accomplish that goal. That you mentioned, we don't necessarily have to say this item's a bestseller. We could say this is our house special. Or I've even seen restaurants, to stay with the restaurant example, where you come in and they have a hamburger, but the name of the restaurant is Skips or whatever. So that's the Skips burger. And you're like, well, if they put their name on it, it's got to be good.
Must be good, right? Right, exactly. Yeah. So how you describe something, and there are also studies that say, you could have I don't know, barbecued ribs, or you could have Jack Daniel's barbecue sauce basted ribs, and it's like, oh, well, if they're the Jack Daniel's barbecue sauce ribs, they must be good. So there are things that we can do. There's also the BYAF technique, which is BYAF stands for "But You Are Free," and what behavioral scientists have found is you can tell someone what you want them to do, you can ask them to do it, and then if you follow the request with a phrase like, but you are free to choose, or it's up to you, or it's your choice, or your call, on average, it doubles the likelihood that people will do what you're asking because you're just reminding them that, they're the ones who are making the decision. You're not pushing them into it. You're not forcing them into it. You've asked them to do it, but you're reminding them that they're actively choosing. And when I found that piece of research, I thought that is really interesting. It almost seems counterintuitive. Like, why would we ask someone, to make a purchase and then quickly remind them, but you don't have to. But it turns out that there's a very good reason for it. It reminds people that they're choosing to do this on their own. And as a result, they just seem to be more likely, twice as likely on average, to do it.
It's incredible to me how reactive our brains are to certain words. I know in your book, for example, Nancy, you talk about people saying, because I need you to do this thing because whatever. And we're conditioned to respond to that in a much more positive way versus if somebody just comes up and gives us a reason without even saying because. What are some of the most common, I'll say, verbal triggers that marketers should know about or that you've seen people use successfully?
Sure. So because is certainly one of them. That was research from Ellen Langer out of Harvard. And what she found was because is like an automatic compliance trigger. When we see or hear it, we just start to agree without even processing what comes next. So, it's always helpful to give people a reason why they should do something. And certainly if we said, hey, you should sign up for my financial newsletter because it'll make you a millionaire, well, that's a great reason. Everyone would be signing up. But we can't say that if it's not true. And it's probably not going to be true, right? But it turns out that having a reason could be more important than what that reason actually is, like even having a softer reason. So she ran the study. People were signed up to use a photocopier. She sent someone to head of the line and instructed that person to say, hey, can I cut in front of you? And 60% of the time they were allowed to cut. So that becomes our baseline. But then she repeats it. She sends someone to head of the line and instructs them to say, excuse me, can I cut in front of you because I'm in a hurry and I have some copies to make? Well, here the 60% number shoots up to 94, and we think it's because they said they were in a hurry. But she repeats it a third time, sends someone to head of the line, instructs them to say, excuse me, can I cut in front of you because I have some copies to make? Now, because I have some copies to make. Everybody standing in that line is standing in that line, not to get a coffee, but because they have some copies to make. But the 94% number drops only to 93%. Statistically insignificant, still that same high, lift over the baseline 60. And she identified the word because as an automatic compliance trigger. When we see or hear it, we just start to agree. We assume that whatever's coming next is going to be a good, legitimate reason. And it just puts us in an agreeable mindset. So that's one power word. Another great one is the word imagine. And imagine is wonderful because when you ask someone to imagine something, two things happen. One, their defenses go down, right? We're in imagination land, right? We're at Disney World. It's imagination land, right? This isn't reality. It's imagination. So we're just imagining. So our defenses go right down. And then when you ask someone to imagine something, they populate that thing precisely to their taste. If I said, Paul, imagine what you'd do if you had, an extra day off every week, or if I said, Colin, imagine what you would do if I'd say, Paul, maybe you would be on the golf course and Colin, maybe, you would be, reading all those books that you've wanted to get, and maybe I'm right and maybe I'm wrong. But if I ask you to imagine it, you populate that idea exactly the way you would in a way that I could never possibly get to. And it just creates this ideal scenario, this ideal mental picture, which then, of course, paves the way for, receptivity to the marketing message that we're going to put in front of them. So because, imagine, and then new, and any variation of new. So new, now, introducing, announcing, finally, soon. If you want a verb, use discover, don't use learn. Learn sounds like we're, back in second grade learning math problems, and we really want to be outside at recess. But discover, well, discover sounds like find something new, right? And all of these words, what they do is they tap into the reward center of the brain. So the human brain is actually hardwired to seek out the new and novel, because when we find something that we think is new, it activates the reward center, which releases dopamine, which is, among other things, a feel-good chemical. And so as a result, we're constantly jonesing for that next hit of dopamine, for that next, feel-good chemical to wash over us. So anytime we see something that says new or now or finally or, introducing, announcing, soon, like, ooh, something new, So those are all really good power words. Also, I'd wrap it up by saying the word you is another one. We're all far more interested in ourselves than in anyone else. So, I often say to my clients, play down the I, we, our company, our product name, and upplay the word you. People are way more interested in you. So even if it's something as you'll be interested in blah, 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 as opposed to blah, blah, blah. Like we don't want to lead with the product or the client or the I or the we, but get that word you in there.
So we need to title everything, imagine you discover fill in the blank because fill in the blank, right?
I love it. I love it. Imagine reminds me of my radio days and sales and coming up with creative copy. It was the theater of the mind, and imagine. And that's how we pitched it, with the commercials for radio, because it wasn't television. It wasn't a picture you could see, but the pitch was being able to imagine that in your home, imagine that in your garage, imagine you at, the theme park, and how you would experience that for yourself.
Yeah. Creating that mental picture is huge, because you've got it in your head, and then, you kind of don't want to give it up, right? Imagine what it would be like to have this product. Imagine what it would be like to be a member of this program, we get all these benefits, and you start to picture that in your head and you're like, yeah, that's what I want. I don't want to walk away from that. That sounds great.
Nancy, we've talked a lot, uh, basically up to this point in the conversation, about what I would consider as more conversion strategies, right? How are we leveraging our message better? How are we phrasing our differentiators in more compelling ways, et cetera? Marketers tend to spend most of our time, most of our resources filling the funnel, and we all too often forget about people that have already converted. They've already signed up, downloaded, bought, whatever. How should marketers or customer success teams, sales teams, et cetera, be thinking about behavioral science to retain existing customers and keep them happy and all those things?
Sure, sure. So, one way is to remind people what they have. There's something known as the endowment effect, and that is that we place greater value on things that we think of as ours. So, it's not a bad thing to remind customers of all the value that they get from being your customer, all the years they've been your customer, all the things that they could take advantage of. If you're trying to get someone to leave their current provider and come to you, you make, you make your product seem like it's better, like the grass is always greener on the other side. But if you want to keep your customers where they are, you want to sow some seeds of doubt. You want to, say, hey, you don't want to lose the award-winning customer service you've come to rely on. You don't want to have to learn a whole new interface. Do you want to risk going over there where they say everything is good, but then when you find out that it's not, and there's not, a phone number that you can just dial and get to someone right away and get the help that you need. So, so those are definitely ways to do that. There was an interesting study that came out. I think it was Adobe that did this, where people were, I think they'd slightly raised their prices or something, but there was some trigger event where people were starting to call up and saying, I'm gonna unsubscribe, I'm going to cancel. And typically, industry wide, what do we do when people call to cancel? We say, well, why do you want to cancel, right? You call the customer service number and how I'm going to cancel. Okay, why do you want to cancel? And they kind of flipped the script. And what they did instead is they asked, they're like, okay, can you tell me why you subscribed to begin with? Like, why you originally wanted to sign up, or why you originally did sign up. And they ended up saving a lot more people, right? Stopping them from unsubscribing, because it made people remember, and it was in their own words, they were recounting the story, why they wanted to do this, why it was valuable for them, and so then I think they were like, well, all right, if we could adjust your price a little bit, or if we can offer you this other plan instead of this one. But they managed to keep a lot of those people that were on their way out. So, getting people to, if they're on the brink of leaving, getting them to remember why they chose you to begin with can also be a strong strategy.
I love that. I just moved recently and I had to discontinue internet service with one provider and switch to another because it was a better opportunity. And the immediate thing is, okay, I want you to be transferred to our retention department, and the whole pitch is dropping price, getting more opportunities to devalue the product. So the Adobe example and creating that value before price makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I thought it was really, I want to say it was a Ogilvy and Mather case study. And it was like a 10% save rate or something. I mean, not inconsequential. But yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting. Because yeah, it's like, instead of just throwing all this stuff at you, they first got you to, kind of put yourself in the right mindset to even get, an alternate offer, that might make you stay, because you're thinking about, I don't know if I want to give this stuff up, and this is why I chose it. So yeah, it's an interesting technique.
That really is. I mean, it flips the script away from, in marketing terms, leading somebody or pushing somebody or pulling somebody, and you're just letting them talk it out themselves. It's just very cool, almost therapeutic, I would think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I think there are some of these behavioral science tactics that work either way. I mean, you can use them for acquisition, you can use them for retention. We talked a little bit about social proof. People have tendency to do what people like them do. So if you're trying to decide whether or not to become a customer, social proof is going to be helpful. But even encouraging people to stay customers, to just kind of double down on their decision, reminding them it was a good decision by telling them how many new customers have signed up, by having, testimonials from longtime customers, by just, reinforcing that decision that they made by letting them know that more and more people are doing the same thing, so it can work both ways. You can use it as an acquisition play. You can also use it as a retention or a loyalty play. So, I think there are probably a few of those that, loss aversion, what you're going to lose if you don't switch to us, what you're going to lose if you leave us, right? Um,
That's a really, really good point, and I don't want us to gloss over that because, again, most marketing teams and most organizations in general, we talk about customer lifetime value with an expectation that at some point there's a distancing between the customer and our service. We're looking at acquisition cost. We're typically not, at least I'm not having conversations around what's our retention cost, right? Like we're spending X number of dollars to get somebody to, again, sign up, download, buy, subscribe, whatever. How much are we spending to retain that person? And is our customer success team or our implementation team, operations team, sales team, fill in the blank, are they having the same training? Do they understand behavioral science or just general psychology and messaging to the degree that our marketing team does? And if they do, awesome. We should have high retention rates. But if they don't, maybe there's some coaching or something that can go on that would really be beneficial to those teams and obviously to the marketing team, because the longer we retain somebody, the higher that customer lifetime value.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think just generally speaking, we're all about acquisition, 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 and we give retention short shrift. But once we have a customer, theoretically, it would be easier to retain them and cheaper to retain them than to spend all this money to convince someone to completely change their behavior and choose you, as opposed to someone else, or leave where they are and come over to you as a conquest. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do. And once we've got them, we should hang on to them. I think labeling is another good way to retain people, because you call them, you can refer to people as as one of our best customers, as one of our long-standing customers, as as a fan of our product or something, just kind of reiterating and reinforcing that relationship that exists. And when you label somebody as part of a group, they behave like part of that group. So if I say to you, you're one of our best customers, well, you start to behave like one of the best customers. And if I ask you to perhaps consider an upgrade, well, what would a best customer do? They would at least consider the upgrade, right? So labeling people appropriately so that it's going to match the request that you're about to make of them makes a lot of sense. And if the request is simply to stay where you are and not leave, there are ways to create the correct label too. One of our long-term customers, one of our oldest or our most loyal. If you've just been told you're one of the most loyal customers, it's kind of hard to say, oh, by the way, I'm leaving, right?
I'm interested to really evaluate some effective behavioral tactics that us as marketers could use. It's not going to change the entire strategy of a marketing plan.
Sometimes we talked a little bit about framing. Sometimes it's just how we're going to frame something, and actually we could talk about framing and loss aversion together, because say the marketing strategy is we're going to introduce a new product and we're going to have a introductory discount for it, right? So you can talk about that in one of two ways. You can say, today you can save $100, or you could say tomorrow you'll pay $100 more, right? So, do I want to talk about saving, or do I want to talk about paying more? And, conventional wisdom would say, well, talk about the savings, because people love to save. Everyone says they love to save. But behavioral science has found that people are twice as motivated to avoid the pain of loss as they are to achieve the pleasure of gain. So in marketing, we double down on the gains, the benefits, the savings, the advantages, all the wonderful things that will happen. And we know that they work. I'm not saying that they don't, but there is something that might work better. And that's why I always, encourage my clients to test, because you could say, save $100 today, or you could say you'll pay $100 more tomorrow. And based on behavioral science, based on the idea of loss aversion, it's quite probable that that second version is the one that's going to get the greater response. So sometimes it's a matter of the words that we choose, how we frame things. Do we use, a loss aversion, or a loss frame versus a gain frame? So we're not blowing up the strategy. We're not changing the product or the pricing, but we're changing maybe the language around it. Or speaking of pricing, sometimes how we display prices can make a difference. So, we might have done our price elasticity study. We know what the price is going to be. We've checked the competition. This is the price. And, say it's $150. So you can display that $150 a few different ways and in a few different areas, right? So $150 on the top left of your screen feels like a higher price than that $150 on the bottom left of the screen or the page, where it feels like a lower price. It's called magnitude encoding effect, but the position and the amount of space that the price takes up kind of also suggests or influences the value or the amount that it's taking up. So you could say $150 is $150 decimal point 00. That's going to take up more space than $150 without the decimal point and the 00. Some studies show that the $ being half the size of the numeral makes that $150 seem like less money. So, or you can spell out in words 150, and that makes people even less price sensitive. So what that says to marketers is, we're not necessarily changing our pricing strategy, but if we want to emphasize the cost of something, let's make that price take up very little physical space. If we want to emphasize how much they're saving, let's make that price or that number take up more physical space. Let's have it take up more space. Let's have it higher on the page or on the screen. Whereas if we're talking about the actual cost, let's have it take lower, or you have it lower on the screen and have it take less physical space. So there are some interesting things that we can do to influence perception when nothing really changes. The product, the price, the features and benefits, none of that changes. The marketing plan doesn't change, but just the language we choose, or how the words that we choose, or how we choose to display numbers and prices can make a difference.
This is really fascinating, Nancy. I'm going to read between the lines of what you just said too. And I know this from listening to some of your keynotes and your book and everything, where you are not coming at this and prescribing, here are the 3 things you need to do, or the 30 things you need to do to convert more, sell more, what have you. You have this ability to step in and say, here's what we're going to test. And the way you're structuring the tests are based in research, very intelligent, very strategic. You have a clear hypothesis. So I hope our listeners, and I'm looking at it this way, are receiving this information and thinking, I'm not leaving here and using the word because in all of my copy. What I'm doing is I'm testing using the word because and using the word you and using these other words in various iterations of my copy to see what it does. Does it accomplish this thing that I'm trying to do? Increase conversion rate, increase customer retention, increase fill in the blank, right? And what you just did with the different ways we can say 150, I think is a perfect example of that, where, hey, use the 150 without decimal points. Try that. Do a split test between a normal size $ and a small $. Do a split test between typing it out, ONE, right, versus using the numerical 150. So what you're saying is just absolutely insightful, where we can take the knowledge of behavioral science and we can go split test, A/B test, multivariate test, to our heart's content, to see what impact are we actually getting, so we can continue to get better. And I appreciate the fact that you brought that up.
Yeah, the truth is, there's no magic wand where we can just wave it and everyone is going to do precisely what we want them to do. If that were the case, the 3 of us would all have private islands someplace, and
Right.
we'd be relaxing. We wouldn't be working for a living. But none of us, no marketer can guarantee 100% success. But what we can do is, we can increase the likelihood that people will do what we're asking them to do. And, so we're going to test. And what my book allows you to do is put together an educated test, so that you're not just kind of plucking things out of the air. You're not depending on somebody's personal preferences. You don't have to wonder, does the copywriter really want to write the great American novel, and that's why they've written it this way? Does the art director really want to have something hanging in a museum, and that's why they've drawn it this way? Like you can go in with an educated hypothesis and say, all right, if I'm trying to accomplish this, and these are the reasons I think people may not want to do what I'm asking them to do. Now, here are 3 or 4 or 5 behavioral science techniques that would help overcome those reasons. Let's put this out in the marketplace in a controlled test, and let's see where we get traction. And it's it's giving you just a better platform from which to test from. But marketers should be testing because, what works for one may not work for the other. What worked in the past may start to fatigue and not work as well. Something that you never thought would work might surprise you and work. But having this behavioral science foundation, understanding the decision-making shortcuts that people rely on, gives us as marketers kind of a leg up in figuring out, well, what should we put in the market and test? What has the highest likelihood of coming back as a win?
Nancy, how are you seeing behavioral science and how marketers are use it evolve with generative AI? It seems like it's easy to have ChatGPT or Gemini write copy for me or do things, and I just tell it write copy that's going to convert, write better copy, make this sound better, those sorts of things. It's I don't want to say it's leading to laziness because people have always been lazy, but it feels like we're becoming more reliant on technology and more reliant on self-service from a customer perspective. Many of the techniques and ideas that we've talked about do rely at some level on human to human interaction. How are you seeing that evolve with the increase of Gen AI?
So some of the marketing writers that I most admire are continuing to write their own copy, and that's what I do. But you can use AI to do some initial research. You can use it to sanity check your copy. You can use it to say, all right, is this the right reading level that I'm after? You can use it to surface some ideas and then look at what you've done and say, oh, did I miss something? Gee, I hadn't even thought about that. But what I recommend against, at least at this stage of the game, is just feeding in the prompts, taking what comes out and running it. You'll get kind of a crowdsourced average. It's going to be better than 50% of what you could find and not as good as and that's not necessarily what you want. You're not necessarily going to get that human to human connection. You're not going to get the emotion. You're not going to be able to do something in such a novel way that it breaks through and cuts through the clutter and makes people pay attention. So some of the very things that we know work in sales and marketing, that human connection, that different way of looking at things, you're not necessarily going to get. So using it as a tool, but making sure that the human still has the final say is at least what I'm recommending today. Is that going to change? Who knows? There's so many rapid advances, but for now, that's what my position is. And but there are so many other ways to use AI that doesn't necessarily require creating copy. It could be helping us to source information and optimize our media spend and, in a research function, condense, a lot of information to something that we can find more manageable. There are lots and lots of other things that we can do with it. So we're not saying to not use it, just use it judiciously.
My head is turning here on a lot of the opportunities that we could be working with our clients on, and considering to challenge A/B testing opportunities as well, and really putting this behavioral science to work. Nancy, one of the things that we like to ask our guests at the end of the conversation is, what are you rethinking today? It could be something professionally, personally, spiritually, hopefully not politically with the environment out there, but interested to see what you're rethinking.
Yeah, that's a good question. I love what I do, and I have been told lately that I work too much, and so I have been thinking about that lately. I'm like, well, am I working too much? Could I be working a little less, or maybe starting to maybe find ways to work more efficiently? Is that the problem, or maybe I'm just taking on too many things? But then the flip side of that is I love what I do, and yeah, I could start turning down clients. I can start turning down speaking engagements, but I don't know if I'll be as happy. So it's like, yes, I'm logging a lot of hours and a lot of miles, but I'm enjoying it. So I've been thinking about that. I think you get to a certain age. I'm a woman of a certain age, and it's like, all right, I'm not in my 20s anymore, and should I be striving for a little more of that work-life balance that's so elusive for us all. And so I find myself thinking about that maybe a little bit more these days. And I haven't really found the solution. I keep ending up at this place that says but you love what you're doing. So do you really need to change it, But anyway, that's something I'm kind of rethinking. I hope that's a sufficient answer.
Absolutely.
Nancy, how can folks follow up with you if they want more information about leveraging behavioral science in marketing?
Sure. So I would recommend checking out my book, Using Behavioral Science in Marketing. It's available online. I'm on Twitter and Threads and LinkedIn and Facebook. So follow me on the socials. Certainly feel free to drop me a line. You can email me, and you can go to my agency's website. It's HBT, which stands for Human Behavior Triggers. HBT MKTG Marketing, which is shortened HBTMKTG.com. And we have a lot of interviews and articles posted there. So there's a lot more information about using behavioral science in email and direct mail and social and, integrated campaigns. So check out all of that. And and my email address is on the site. I would love to hear from any of your listeners via email, via social. Happy to connect and continue this conversation.
Marvelous. Well, Nancy, we appreciate you making time to converse with us and drop a lot of truth bombs and good education for our listeners here today. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to get to?
Yeah, no, we had a wide-ranging, far-ranging conversation, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I really have. I think that the closing note is just as marketers, we just need to be aware of the fact that people don't always make decisions the way we think they do. We like to think that we, and by extension, our customers and prospects, make these well thought out, well considered decisions. And truthfully, sometimes we do, but very often we're cruising along on autopilot. And that represents a big opportunity for us as marketers, because if we're aware of the decision-making shortcuts that people routinely rely on, it puts us in a position to create better marketing materials that take advantage of that and create a win-win situation for our customers and prospects as well as for us. So I just encourage people to keep that top of mind.
Well said. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today on the Rethink Marketing Podcast. Thank you again, Nancy, for joining us. Until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions and keep rethinking what you're going to be testing. Nancy gave us so many insights and ideas that we can go out and actually test and get results on and get better by using. So I'm excited to hear what's working for you. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If people want to connect with us, where should they go, Paul?
RethinkMarketingPodcast.com, Colin. What can listeners do to help us in return for the sage marketing wisdom and our pithy humor?
They can help us by leaving a review on their favorite platform or sharing this episode with a fellow marketer to help them cut through the clutter.
Well, until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions.